sex workers on Reddit. What is the saddest request/story you have with a client? A man basically paid me to compliment him daily. He had just gotten out of an extremely toxic and abusive relationship, and had the lowest self-esteem I'd ever seen. I'd comfort him, listen to him, help him, and constantly let him know he was a lot better than what he thought he was. I had to break ties when he started to assume we were dating/I was doing it out of love. I cared about him, sure, but I didn't love him, nor did I seek a relationship with him. After a while I returned half his money, and wished him luck. This wasn't me, but when I was stripping, my coworker had an elderly client, who would come in and buy her out in VIP for the whole night just to nap in her lap. And since our club was not high-end, let's say, our VIP were connected, so every time I had a lap dance I'd go into VIP, and just see her on her phone with him just napping with his head on her thighs. Our club was only open for 8 hours, 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., and then he'd get up when it was last call, give her a big hug, and dip. Apparently, he'd been married for like 45 years, but his wife passed away. He hadn't slept alone since he was 18 years old, and couldn't sleep for shit in his own bed. He'd come to the club and get his sleep there with fucking Rihanna booming over the speakers. He slept through all of it. There was a rumor that he bought her perfume that matched what his wife wore, but I never found out if that was true. My time to shine. This has been posted before, but it's the only thing I have to contribute. So this trip I used to manage had this regular, who would come in once a month. Roughly he tipped well, kept to himself, and was polite enough every time he came in, though he brought this old school lace nightie, which he would get the girls to wear, and dance in. He tipped them lavishly as well as paid their hourly rate, whatever drinks they wanted, etc. etc. It wasn't until the second or third time I finally asked one of the girls what the deal was with the BYO lingerie, and she told me that it was his dead grandmother's nightie. So there you have it. An elderly man would come in whenever he'd saved enough money to afford an hour or two. He didn't speak much, but always had the kindest smile for me. All he wanted to do was to hold me in his arms and sway gently to the music. Nothing else. After a couple of months he shared with me that he used to do this with his wife before she died, and that he misses the intimacy of their moments together. At some point he stopped coming. I don't know what happened to him, but I will never forget him. I had a client who was a newbie. He booked me for a dinner date. During dinner, he started crying. He broke down and told me he had just gone through a terrible divorce. It sounded like he still loved her, but she was already engaged to her new man. I ended up seeing this client regularly, and things devolved. The ex-wife took the kids out of state. The kids wanted their cats, so he gave them up too. Both his parents were dead, no siblings. He stopped seeing me for a while when he got a new girlfriend. She ended up using him for his money. The last time I saw him, he said he was thinking of moving to Mexico. He wanted to get away. I didn't hear from him, and life became busy for me. A few years later I thought of him randomly, and looked him up. I found his obituary, and it was a few weeks after the last time I saw him. I think he killed himself, and I really feel terrible about it. It really haunts me. I have a client who gives me an allowance just to go and see his mom. Absolutely nothing sexual. I just have lunch or dinner with her a few times a week, hang out and talk. She doesn't live alone, he's got a whole staff to care for her, but she gets lonely. Honestly, if he'd stop giving me the allowance I probably wouldn't stop coming. It makes me kinda sad when I think that this dude can afford to spend a lump sum on me, but can't afford to lose a day of work to see his mom. The young man, who came into a rural Australia brothel I was working in. He didn't want sex, he just wanted someone to hold him and touch him. For 2 hours. He barely spoke, but he did tell me his story. He lived on a large station, I'm talking around 10,000 km squared. His parents lived in the farmhouse at the front of the property, and he lived at the other end of the property in a smaller house on his own. Like most farmers, he worked dawn till dusk most days. He rarely spoke to other humans, and he didn't have time to go out and meet women. I felt sad for him, because this was his life, and he had pretty much lost his social skills. 3 guys hiring 3 girls to celebrate the birth of one of the men's first son. Wife was still in hospital. It was in South Korea. Someone requested me to come in the middle of the night for a very high rate. Arrived there, the guy finally just wanted to take a rest on my knees. Kinda the reverse here from the stories here. I had an escort that would hit me up to get rides in my cab for her out calls or hotel changes. Instead of charging her for rides to go out and get food, she'd just buy me food also, because I was often too busy to stop and eat at times. One night when we were both having a slow night, she mentioned how she hadn't had a home-cooked meal in over a year and would kill for a steak. I told her I had 2 in my fridge if she wanted one. Ended up driving to my house, picking up my steaks, some instant mashed potatoes, can of corn, and some fresh garlic bread. Went back to where she was staying and cooked a home-cooked meal in her hotel with a microwave and a George Foreman grill. We ended up eating and watching TV that I pick up from a red box down the street. She randomly hugged me and started bawling her eyes out because I was the first person in the past year that has treated her like a regular person, and couldn't remember the last time she could relax and enjoy herself. I was hired by a middle-aged woman who just wanted companion for the evening and night. She was a beautiful woman who I didn't understand why she hired me, but I met her at the bar, asked her name, and she gave me her card and told me to treat her, and my name was Bill. So I brought her drinks and paid for her meal. We went to watch a movie. I think it was Molly's Game, I can't remember. Then we took an Uber back to hers, and we spent the night. I only found out Wish does this by talking after we spent the night. Her husband and son died about 4 years ago, and she likes pretending when she's having a bad day that she goes on a date with someone that reminds her of her husband. People often think that it's about sex. Sometimes it's not about the sex, it's about the companionship and the feeling of reliving past moment, or even just ignoring emotions at the time. I had a regular who was an older gentleman. Yes, we did do some deeds, but 95% of the time he just wanted company. I'd go with him grocery shopping, out to eat, to his apartment to cuddle and watch movies. He'd tell me stories about his family that had passed, stories from when he was a kid, stuff he learned when he got his pilot's license. I was at his funeral when he passed. I'll never forget such a sweet lonely man who just wanted human companionship. I won't share any specifics, but I've often experienced clients opening up about their past traumas. Sometimes there is tears. Always hugs. It's sad, but I'm happy to be there for them in the limited way that I can. Sad that most of the stories are just dudes needing a place to talk/cry. I had a man in a wheelchair request that I degrade him by using his disability as a trigger point for the act. I had a call through an escort service at about 6:30 a.m, way too early for me, I was sleeping. I kept ignoring my phone, they kept persisting. I finally picked up, agreed on an astronomical hourly rate, and the client agreed. I show up to his room about 7:30 a.m, and he answered, and to my surprise he's a tall, fit guy in his late 20s. He gave my full agreed rate. I could tell he had been drinking. We're sitting on the bed, and I'm trying to ask him questions to keep the mood light and friendly. And he starts to cry, like he's bawling his eyes out. I could tell he wasn't crying beforehand, just really wasted. I was so shocked I didn't know what to do, especially since he's this macho guy. I figured out he was in the armed forces. He told me he was in town for his father's funeral, and his emotions and feelings were just hitting him, and he wanted someone to be there with him. So I stayed the whole time, and I let him talk and breathe and held him for a bit. We didn't do anything sexual except a kiss at the end when my driver picked me up. He gave me his number and told me to call him if I was ever in his city. I still have it.